Welcome back to the Mad Pastors Podcast. I'm Ian Dunaway.
I'm Michael.
And we're frozen in here in the beautiful and illustrious.
Build a snowman?
Yeah, I do not. It is we had a we're doing this week's podcast via our homes and shooting webcams, so you're welcome. But yeah, it's been crazy. We were within 2 or 3 degrees of an all-time low, record low. So it was a negative 21 degree wind chill. And I don't really understand the science of wind chill and heat index and all that, because
I just
they
know
say
it gets cold.
Yeah, it just is real cold. And then they say that the wind chill has to do with hypothermia and all that kind of stuff and frostbite. So anyway,
here's what I know. Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we live,
right,
is certainly not accustomed to below zero temperatures, and then an additional 20 some on the wind factor. And so our whole region of the country is shut down. In fact, we had couldn't record our podcast this morning because they're doing rolling blackouts to conserve energy, and it's just part of our energy comes from windmills because there's a lot of wind in this part of the country, but the windmills are frozen, and so they're not turning, and so we're down a lot of energy, and so as a result, you get webcam Ian and webcam Michael for this week's podcast. If you're watching it on YouTube, which, by the way, hopefully you're watching it on YouTube, subscribe to. Go to youtube.com and you will search up G6 Allies and you'll find the Mad Pastors podcast there. Subscribe to that. Help us out that way. That would be awesome. And in the meantime, stay warm wherever you are, because I think most everybody in the country is.
Well, at least people.
Like, here's how weird. Like, we thought when 2020 ended that everything would go back to normal, and it's just continued to get more and more weird.
Right.
We've got like sub-zero temperatures, and I've read yesterday that it was colder in Austin, Texas than it was in Anchorage, Alaska. Like that's that's weird, right?
Yeah,
we got between that and cocaine hippos down in Colombia. It's a weird year, just like 2020.
Man, it's like we're living in Snowpiercer, but it's crazy. Anyway, all that to say, what we do as a podcast is that we make sure that when we're cold, we stay warm. And how do we stay warm? With Joy House Coffee. I don't know if you've tried Joy House Coffee, but they're one of our sponsors and an amazing group of people who have an entire company designed to take care of those in Haiti by teaching them real world skills, by building an economy in coffee, by selling it fair trade or above prices. So listen, if you need to stay warm and caffeinated, as we always do, jump into some Joy House, grab a little coffee. Now we've been talking this is the third of 4 podcasts talking about sport and lessons that we learn from sports and how that connects. That's actually what Michael spent his time as a working on his PhD in the theology of sport and what that looks like. And so we're really pulling a lot of info from his book and this idea of, pastors don't really talk about this kind of stuff. We use a lot of sports stories. We talk about, a lot of things in sports. We may watch sports, but at the end of the day, how does sport really reflect the gospel, and how does it reflect how we do ministry? And, Yogi Berra once said that if there's a fork in the road, take it. And so we decided to take it. And all that to say,
classic Yogi.
I love Yogi Berra. We've opened up everyone, and we will continue to do that until we're done with the series. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about what does sport teach us about goodness? And it's kind of an odd title, right?
It is kind of odd. Last week, so each week we're learning what sport teaches us about something, and then we are applying it either to our role as pastors or just as Christ followers. We're applying it to discipleship and our own spiritual formation, right?
Right.
And so last week we talked about what sport teaches us about ourselves, and we identified the kind of human essence of sport. And this week we build onto that and add to it. But we're going to look at the basic goodness of sport. And if you go back to the first week of this series, episode 1 of this series about sport, we mentioned there were several different ways of understanding sport, several different views on it that the church has taken throughout history. One of those being that sport is insignificant, that it doesn't matter. It's a morally neutral thing, and as well as the instrumental view that it also took this, that sport's morally neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It's how you use it and what you can bring about because of it that makes it good or bad. And then there was the immoral view that just says sport is in itself inherently wrong and bad, or and so we'll come back to that idea here in a bit. But we said that we didn't really like any of those views, that they all are missing out on something. And this is at the core of what they're missing out on. Each of those views either say that it's morally neutral or it's morally bad. None of the views that the church has adopted over the last 2,000 years has suggested that sport is morally good. And that's what I want us to get at, is that sport is a moral good. It is something, it has inherent value in it that we are right to pursue because that's how God has created us. And the key element,
I don't think that we think about it that way, though. It's interesting. We like it, we enjoy it, we watch it, we play it, but we don't ever really think about it as a good. Like it's something that we do, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We just think, hey, yeah, that's fun. We look at it more as an entertainment piece than anything, right? That it's fun, it's enjoyable. I like to play it, I like to watch it, but we don't recognize that it has intrinsic value to that activity itself. And at the core of that intrinsic value is this concept of play. And what we need to recognize is that God has created us as human beings who play. I mean, that's part of who we are, is we are playful creatures. And you certainly don't have to teach children this, right? In any culture, any society, any civilization from any time period, human beings play, right? Whether you grow up in the suburbs in a very wealthy part of the United States, or whether you grow up on the plains of the Serengeti, if you're walking down a path and you see a ball, you're going to kick it, right? Like if you see a stick, you're going to pick up a stick and you're going to see how far you can throw it. And that's just part of who we are as human beings. And so that keys us into the fact that there is something valuable in that. There is no civilization that has ever existed that did not value play in some form or fashion. Now, that play may be different. For some, it may be a particular sport as we know them today, or it may be, make-believe. It could be a number of different things, but play is a central part of who we are as human beings. And it's helpful. I mean, it gets a little bit academic, but I think it is helpful in understanding what we mean by play to identify what we're talking about when we say play. Because when we think of play, most of the time we do think of kids, right? We think of little kids running around, or
something you do when you have time to waste.
Yes, or it's like we're daydreaming, or if you're just wasting time. Yeah, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But there's really play has basically 5 different characteristics, and so let's walk through each of these 5 really, really quickly together. First, it's a free activity, and what I mean by a free activity is you can't be forced to play. Right? I can't force you
unless you're from China
to play. Even then, you're going through a certain, like if we're talking about a sport, you're going through the actions of participating in that sport, but you're not actually playing, right? You're doing something different that has the exact same action. So it has to be participated in voluntarily. So I like to use the example of this, of if my boss tells me, if I'm a salesman and my boss says, hey, we got a prospective client that's coming into town, you need to take him out and play golf with him and try and close the deal.
Right.
But I don't play golf. So I'm going to go out onto the course. I'm going to swing a club. I'm going to go through all of the same motions. I have zero interest in golf at all, right? I'm not there for golf. I'm not playing to play the game of golf. I'm, quote, playing for something completely other reason than that. So I'm pretending to play. I'm not actually playing. But if I'm out there on my own, if I just say I want to go play golf and I enjoy it and I'm out there to play the game itself, then in the very truest sense of the word, I am playing that game.
So
right?
It comes down to true play versus what we might see as doing something truly versus doing something just going through the motions of it, right?
Yeah. And
like you can do those.
That's not a foreign concept to Christians, right? Or to anybody really, but particularly as Christians, our motives matter. Why we're doing the things that we do matter. Jesus talks about that repeatedly, and one of the greatest examples is, the Bible says you shall not commit adultery, but if you look lustfully after a woman, you've already committed adultery in your heart, right? Jesus makes a very clear distinction between those things that we do outwardly, have a certain appearance, and the internal motives of those things.
Well, and even, you even think about Matthew 7, right? The famous passage where so many people come to Jesus, and he says in the end, people will come to me and say, we cast out demons in your name. We did all these things. They go through this long list of what we did do. And Jesus says, depart from me, for I never knew you. And there's this authenticity to that, which I think the second characteristic is interesting, right? That the end is uncertain. And so not just going through the motions, but the enjoyment of sport would lose its impact at the end we're revealed. What do you mean by that?
So the enjoyment of it is gone. This is something that anybody who is a sports fan will understand this illustration. And even if you're not a sports fan, you're going to get this illustration. If you DVR a game, because you've got to be somewhere or whatever, and you DVR the game, you don't want anybody to tell you about that game, right?
Yeah.
You want to be able to watch the whole thing, but on your way home, you accidentally turn on the radio and you hear them tell you the final score of the game.
Yep, been there.
That you've got on your DVR when you go home, right?
It reminds me of that clip.
Some element of joy that you have instantly lost in watching that game, because you now know the end. It doesn't have the same characteristic as it would if the end was still suspenseful, right?
The same thing with movies, right? The same thing with, I just saw, there's this big thing going around about movie tropes, and if you hear them, it ruins movies. And the idea that, I don't know if this is true or not, I've just seen it around a lot, but Apple doesn't allow bad guys to use Apple phones.
To use villains can't use Apple phones.
So,
I've seen that.
And so, but Apple I think Apple did the Who Done It movie at that Knives Sharpened. I can't remember what the name of it is.
Knives Out.
Knives Out.
Yep.
And which I had no idea. And so they're going through it and clicking through, and it totally makes sense. And you're just going, oh, that just ruined it for me.
It ruins it, yes.
Because now the end is somewhat
and I would say watching movies is also a form of play. It's not always physical activity like a sport.
I play a lot.
So the end is uncertain. That's another characteristic of play, that if the end is already determined, and there's no element of uncertainty in it, then whatever it is you're doing isn't really play. Next, it has a clear distinction from the real world. Again, it's something else we can real easily grasp, right? If you and I enter into a game of football, what's happening on that field is far removed from everything that's happening in the real world, right? We kind of we mutually enter into this idea of our own little world that we've created with the rules. And we talked about that a little bit last week.
Yeah.
It is separate from reality.
Which is interesting.
That's where you see people say, well, hey, it's just a game. I'm sorry your team lost, but it's just a game. It's not real.
Right.
It's just a game.
Well, but then there's a deeper implication for that, because you think about, again, we're going to go to a movie, but we all love movies. And so, and if you don't, I don't know if you need to listen. But either way, think about, you almost think about the bigger consequences of that idea, like in something like Remember the Titans. This world is ruled by racism and separated schools, and so they integrate schools, and you hear Denzel Washington talk about this idea that when you go out on that field, it's a different world for you, and he talks about that. And I think there's sports not only has just this different, oh, it's good because of this, but it creates an environment where change can happen in a way that it may not be able to happen in the real world.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. So the next, the fourth characteristic is that it lacks an interest in material gain. And what we mean by that is, if you are participating in a sport or some form of play in order to get something out of it, then it's not really play. So my example of playing golf with a potential business partner, that's what I'm getting at right there, that I'm doing this to gain something else out of it. I'm not doing it for its own sake. I'm using it as a means to a different end. And at that point, it ceases to become this pure form of play that we're talking about. And then number 5 is that it has predefined rules. So what I mean by predefined, and this applies probably more to sport than it does some other forms of play. I mean, we don't really think about watching a movie as having rules.
Sure.
Although we do have a rule of
what about not
asking questions in the middle of the movie.
Exactly.
Right? Like, who's that person? Well, watch, you'll find out. Like
I tell this all the time to people and to my wife, but literally I can sit in a theater with my wife and we're watching this movie and she sat there and she looks over at me and goes, "What's going on?" I don't know what to tell you. It's a 50-foot screen in front of us, and I've never seen it either. But yeah, no doubt. So sorry, there are rules to watching movies, and people need to learn
them. There are predefined rules to it. So if you and I decide to play a game of basketball, we enter into that with this set of rules that are going to define the activity that we're doing, right? You have to dribble the ball. You can't step outside of this box. You have to shoot into the basket, and
which in middle school and high school is the very first fight in the game. Wait a second, you didn't say it was make it take it?
Yes, right.
Like, no, I did.
So there are predefined rules. So if you combine all 5 of those characteristics, you get at what we're talking about when we're talking about this pure form of play that is innate in all of us, that it's a free activity, the end isn't clear, it's uncertain, that there's a distinction from the real world, there's no interest in getting some kind of material gain out of it, and it's got a set of predefined rules. When we are following that, then we're engaging in this concept that we call play. And it's something that we really don't talk much about. In fact, most of the time we just think it's something for kids, right? That kids play. We as adults, we're doing adult things now. We're working, we're producing things, we're creating things. But all humans were created as playful beings, and God has built that into us. So, Pastor, as you're listening to this, here's my challenge for you: learn to play again. We see it we see the cheesy line in Christmas movies all the time that little kids believe in Santa Claus, but at some point as you grow up, you stop believing in Santa Claus, and at some point throughout all of these hokey Christmas movies, the adult who's kind of a Scrooge or a bah humbug kind of guy, something happens and he regains that childhood belief in Santa, and
I believe in Santa again,
all happy again. I want to suggest that we need to do something similar to that, as cheesy and as hokey as it is, with play. That as kids, we love to play. Our minds are creative. We're active. We're physical. We do all of these fun, playful things. But at some point, as we grow up, we stop playing. And we just focus on being productive, which leads to us being workaholics. It leads to us.
It leads to the most medicated nation in history and on the planet. And it's not. And granted, we live in such a culture of extremes where it's like, well, if I do that, I don't want to be poor. Well, you're not going to be poor. You've got to take time for and that's where it goes to pastors and just to believers.
Unhealthy physically, it leads to being unhealthy mentally. I mean, some of the greatest medication that you can take is to learn to play. Right now, I'm not talking about diagnosable illnesses, obviously, right?
Don't go play basketball and stop taking
I don't want the emails saying, "Hey, no." Okay. But play is something all of us ought to be doing, and we ought to be doing it well. And we've talked about this, and we've talked about being a workaholic and managing your schedule and learning to rest and all of those concepts. Rest is really a part of that. That's what we mean by rest, is we're finding things that within which we can play, whether it's watching movies or reading a book or taking a vacation or playing a sport or what have you. We need to play. And so pastors, it is okay. I had a conversation with a pastor, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, who said he had not had a day off in well over 2 months.
Yeah.
And I strongly encouraged him, dude, you need to take a break, take a day off. And he said, I don't know how. I have no clue how to do that. I don't know what that looks like. I would not know what to do with myself if I didn't work.
Some people,
one day.
I mean, there's a group of people that laugh at that, and then a group of people that totally get it, where you go, I don't know how to shut my mind off. I don't know how. I mean, there's always, and this is something, I always heard growing up, is there's always something to do. And so, and usually that was keep working, but we need to remember that there's always going to be something to do. And that means that tomorrow it's going to be there tomorrow. And so the world will not fall out of orbit if we don't do that. Right. But I don't think we do. And so,
but that's kind of the whole point of how we're using sport here as an example or as a teaching tool for us to understand something about our own spiritual growth, right?
Yeah.
That play is a crucial part of sport. Like if you remove the element of play from sport, you're going to get something else entirely.
Yeah.
If you remove the element of play from your own spiritual life, you're going to get something else entirely. We have to include that. And if you have forgotten how to do it, make it an intentional practice to learn how to play again.
And as rom-coms to teach us, learn to love again. But I'll have to say,
hey, this is about sports. Stop making it about movies.
I love movies. We listen. You've mentioned more about Hallmark movies than I'll ever want to know. But we have noted down here as we're looking through this and walking through. We engage in sports for a lot of reasons, but probably the most fundamental reason is play. Right? Play is considered a basic good, and that means it's enjoyed for its own worth with no end. Right? Than itself, no other end. So what does that mean? One, how do we view that with, can you be a professional and paid, to do that and it still be for its own good and for its end? But largely, I think that there's a switch in that, and we can start to kind of switch over into the idea of discipleship and pastoring and who we are. Do we do what we do when it comes to discipling people and doing ministry? And ministry just means serving one another. And do we serve people as pastors and as church leaders and even pastoral families? Do we do it because it's a basic good and it's our calling and our vocation, or are we doing it because that's where our paycheck comes from and that's what we have to do? Is it just a job? Doesn't mean that you can't do it for good and get paid. But honestly, the more I see the rise of the megastar pastors and the more I have worked with those people or aspiring, most of them are aspiring megachurch pastors. Right. They literally exist. They don't give two craps about anybody else in their church. They just care about getting Instagram moments and the prestige and the next step. And so, how do we start to work on this and apply this for us as pastors, that to do what we do for the good of it?
Yeah, I think, when we think about this idea of a basic good, what we mean by that, without getting too philosophical, and if you are interested in the philosophical side of that, Google John Finnis, and that guy has written some very, very helpful insights behind this idea of a natural good or a basic good. And really, there's only about 6 or 7 basic goods like that can't be reduced to anything else. They are inherently good in and of themselves, and play is one of those, where at its core it is a good thing, and we don't even need to defend why we're pursuing it. That if we're engaged in that, it is a good thing to be a part of.
Sure.
And the problem comes in when we start adding different things onto that. that we play a game for the sake of winning, or we play a game for the sake of adding a paycheck to that, or all of these different practices that we add on to it,
Mm-hmm.
and I doubt very many of our viewers are at the professional level, getting
Sure.
big paychecks for sports. And so maybe a more applicable or relatable illustration would be playing a sport for health reasons, right? That I
Yeah.
want to get healthy. I want to be more physically fit. And so I'm going to start playing a game, or I'm going to start playing a sport. And so let's just take a sport we don't use as an example very often, like racquetball, right? So I want to start getting healthy, and so I'm going to start playing racquetball. Well, I'm doing it for the sake of playing racket, or I'm
Sure.
doing it for the sake of health, right? I'm not doing it
Mm-hmm.
for itself. And so we start to think about this in a little bit different way when we relate that same concept to ministry.
Yeah.
Are we doing ministry for the sake of ministry itself? Are
Mm-hmm.
we more personally, are we involving ourselves in spiritual disciplines or our own spiritual formation for its own good? Or are we doing it as a means to something else?
Right.
Like I'm studying God's word so that I can present myself as a better teacher of God's word to everyone else, right? This isn't for me. I'm doing this for everybody else. Or I want my YouTube channel to look really, really good and my sermons to be downloaded by so many people. That's why I'm doing this.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you're missing out on something. In the same way that someone who participates in a sport for some ulterior motive is ultimately missing out or failing to experience that activity to the fullest, we're doing the exact same thing in our discipleship.
Mm.
We are missing out on the fullness of what God has designed our spiritual growth and our spiritual formation to be, because we're not doing it for that reason. We're doing it to gain something else, or to
Mm.
get something peripheral to that. And that in itself, let me back up for a second and clarify that that is not necessarily a bad thing. Getting a paycheck for playing a sport, or getting a paycheck
Sure.
for being a pastor, or becoming physically healthier by playing a sport, those are not bad things, right?
Right.
They are good. They're just different reasons for engaging in it.
Mm.
And I think the danger that we're experiencing is we have shifted so much of our focus to these external things and gaining these other things that we are neglecting the core of the activity itself. And I
Sure.
think that's the same in sport. When you look at our sports culture, I
Yeah.
think that's the exact same thing when you look at our church culture and at ministry professionals.
Mm-hmm.
The comparison is eerily similar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because if you really look at, and this is what I've spent most of my time seeing and observing, and the more I worked with pastors and people and just done it, is most of the time what we run into is that pastors are really glorified, underpaid community events planners. That's what it turns into, is especially with student pastors. And it's well, let's just do something. Let's just have fun. Let's just figure out how to do fun events and and then at the end of the day, your student pastor stops doing ministry because it's not really fulfilling anymore, because who wants to be a 45-year-old student event coordinator, right? I mean, it's just
Right.
at one point it gets old. And we don't tend to build up the people, and we tend to think so much of these guys that they've ascended to this level of where they're no longer even connected with students anymore. I love what Trevor Hamaker said in one of our previous seasons where he was talking, and he just said, everybody's written enough articles on Generation Z that if one person was impacted, we'd have reached all of Generation Z. And it's just funny to me that at the end of the day, it has a lot more to do with, yes, you enjoy the benefits. Being paid to be a pastor is a good thing. Being paid to take care of that. But at the end of the day, we tend to take what are the secondary benefits of something, or our calling, right? As pastors. I mean, you look at Paul. Paul was a bivocational pastor. And Paul, and so, shout out to the bivocational pastors and just the non-paid guys that are out there. But at the end of the day, if you don't look at your ministry and you're not doing what needs to be done, if you're not discipling people for the love of discipling people, if you're not taking care of and serving others because that's what you're called to do and because it's what fulfills you as a believer in Christ, then you need to start asking the question, what do I need to strip away and get rid of? What I think is so funny is that the main mission of the church is exactly what most pastors go, I just don't have time for that. And I wish my people would get there. Well, your people will get there when you start making time
when
for it.
you teach them how to.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to attack one person or the other, but here's the deal. If you're, we're talking, we may do a series pretty soon about, when to fire your pastor and red flags for pastoral leadership. And, one of those is when your pastor, it cannot be, and this doesn't even necessarily happen in mega churches. It happens in all sizes. But when your pastor ceases to be connected to people, that's a problem. When your pastor's not in the community that he expects out of you, or if he doesn't expect people to be in community, that's a problem. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to be doing what I think Bob Goff so brilliantly said. We need to be looking at more things we can quit, not more things we can start.
Right.
And frankly, I've seen 1,200 people show up for an Easter egg hunt for the community and have 800 people on a Sunday morning like usual. All right, it's not. It might make you feel cute that you've done some kind of event that people came to, but if they're not, just go be a party coordinator. And I think that that's where that begins to develop in here, is that when we stop doing ministry for the love of doing ministry and for the love of doing what God has called and gifted us to do, and we start letting everything else dictate what and why we're doing it, we tend to see more and more people get more and more dissatisfied. And the main thing becomes the fourth thing, right? At the end of that. And so,
or
yeah,
the fifth thing or the sixth thing.
usually
Or
the eighth thing.
Yeah, we just keep adding stuff to it.
I deeply dislike Christian movies because they're usually terrible and it makes me embarrassed. So I never watch them. Like, God is not dead. Why? But all of that to say, there was a really funny movie. It looks hilarious, but probably just the best on there. But it's called Church People, and the whole thing is just at watching the previews, I go, yep, I've been there. Okay, yeah, and everybody identifies with that. May be one of the only ones I watch and like, but it's true. I mean, this idea that viewing, so yes, play is good, and sport is a good thing, and I do think you're right. We miss so much of it and the good of it the same way we do in ministry when we start to let everything else take a place. It's always a means to an end. It's always, how am I going to get to my next church job? How am I going to get to this next event? How am I going to further the system that I built? And that's a huge, huge problem. It doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with a lot of those things, but those things, if they become the focus, then eventually we hollow it out. And that's where disillusionment sets in. That's where burnout sets in, is when we're not doing what matters. And I personally feel more fulfilled when I get to meet 2 or 3 times a week with a group of men or with somebody and pour into them and talk with them, or to pastors where we're encouraging and investing, because that's community and that's what we're designed to do. So, as we kind of end out, I mean, this is a shorter podcast for us, but what do we need to end out on today?
I think it's crucial for us just to reiterate a couple of things. One, don't hear what we're not saying. First of all, right? We're not saying that the extra things that are perks or benefits of sport or of play are necessarily bad, because that's naturally where your mind would kind of want to go. If we say, hey, this is inherently good, but we're focused on all the other stuff around it, well, that must mean that stuff is bad. No, not at all. I mean, you look at the professional level of sports now, it's a business, and it is run like a business. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But when we lose complete sight of the core of that activity, which is inherently good, and we don't ever focus on that at all, we're completely losing sight of the original purpose or the goal behind the entire thing. And we start focusing only on those peripheral things. That's when we get into danger of losing or of missing out on something valuable. And so,
Sure.
yes, running the ministry of your church is a good thing. I mean, you're responsible as a pastor, you're responsible for the different ministries. You're responsible for the budget and the finances of your church. And you're
Yeah.
responsible for all of these different things. And you're trying to grow and build it and shape it and cast the vision. And you're doing all of these different things at the organizational level. And that's a good thing that you're doing that. But don't completely lose sight of the heart behind all of it, which is this. And that's the second part of where we want to end out on this.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on what really matters.
Right.
Focus on the core of it. We want you to play and to relax and to rest and to rejuvenate, because that's how God has designed us. And that is part
Mm-hmm.
of your own personal discipleship. You
Yeah.
can't instruct people to do this if you're not willing to do it yourself. I'm not saying you have
Yep.
to be perfect at it all the time. I'm certainly not, but we want to focus in on doing the things that are inherently good and make sure those are a priority for us, and then focus on all the other things around it too, and enjoy the benefits of the things that are around
Sure.
it too. But at the end of the day, we want you to focus on playing, learn how to play again, learn how to relax, pick up a hobby. If you do not have a hobby,
Mm-hmm.
man, find one. Do something that will engage different skill sets, make your different parts of your brain function, will allow your
Mm-hmm.
body to relax. All of those things. Find something enjoyable that you can play at, that you work into your schedule.
Yeah.
Um, you know, one really cool illustration of how this works. I'll stick with racquetball for a minute. Many times we start engaging in that activity because we want some of those peripheral benefits, right? We
Sure.
start playing racquetball because we want to get healthy.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about the way that works is the more you do it, the more you learn to appreciate the inherent goodness of an activity like racquetball. So now all of a sudden
Yeah.
you're not just playing racquetball to get healthy. Now you're tweaking the way you hold the racket, or you're learning
Right.
where your feeding goes. You're learning how to hit the ball at a different angle. You're picking up all of the different skills, because now all of a sudden you've started developing a love for the game of racquetball itself, right?
Mm.
And,
Well, and
and at some
yeah,
point it shifts from I'm doing this to get healthy to I really enjoy playing racquetball,
sure.
and the health is a perk,
When you
right?
kind of talk about like a raising tide raises all ships. When I used to write and be an editor for curriculum, we'd be working on projects that took, I mean, it was quarterly, so you really didn't see a whole lot of benefit for about 4 or 5 months.
Right.
And granted, I had for a brief time in my life decided to start running, which is not something I kept up, but for a while, that particular, I needed to see something that showed me and showed me some progress and helped me. And so I think a lot of times too, so much of discipleship and so much of ministry is a long-term endeavor where you have to sow and sow and sow and wait to reap, that it's really helpful. Like you said, you might get into a hobby or a sport or something like that, but feeling growth in some areas of our lives really has a very practical benefit for us to not lose heart in the midst of it. It's crazy. It seems like it doesn't connect, but becoming a better racquetball player and making strides in racquetball can help you in your ministry with other people, because you don't have to feel so defeated that everything is a long-term wait.
Right.
You can, I mean, there's some joy in that. And I think that that's also, I think God designs us. Not everything is instant gratification, and not everything should be, but there are some things that are more instant than others. And when we're a well-rounded person, I mean, when we ask ourselves, what kind of person do I want to be? And so, I think we can end all this, especially saying, the main thing, good things are good things until they become the main things. And so when you look at it, what do I need to quit in my ministry? What do I need to give more time to? And maybe you don't even need to quit it. You just need to reallocate that time. What do
Right.
I need to put somebody else in charge of, and realize that I'm not God and that nobody wants me to be? And at the end of the day, how can I be healthy and pursue, whether it's a hobby, a career, or not a career, sorry, a hobby or an activity like that, for just for the sake of doing it. And you know what? Here's the deal. You might try out something and it's terrible, and just go try something new.
Then go
Do something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love that. But man, Michael, it's been, I started to do snowshoe walking, and then I realized it only snows like twice a year here. So I can't do that.
If that.
Yeah, it was bad. It's been fun. It's been cold here, but I would rather be in a studio than doing this online. But I'm glad that we get to do it online.
Yep.
So listen, if you're listening, at pastors, listen, if you got a particular subject that you want to hear us talk about, or you're struggling and just need somebody to invest in and talk with, listen, last night I was talking at 9:00 with a pastor who we love and care about, who's part of our network, and just investing in them through a difficult situation. Listen, we're here to do ministry with you. And so we love you guys. We're excited. You need to grab some coffee if you're somewhere around Texas or the Midwest, and take a break. All right. Because it's cold out there. I don't know.
Wherever you are in the country, grab some coffee.
Is it that? Well, that's true. No matter if it's cold or not. I'm just
right.
saying, I think about Groundhog Day when he just goes, it's cold out there every time on the radio. But listen, we love you guys. We'll see you next podcast.
All right. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Pastors podcast today. We hope that you found it not only encouraging, but beneficial that you have people in your corner doing ministry. Here's what we'd love for you to do. If you'd subscribe, review, and share our podcast, that would mean the world to us, and it'd help as many pastors to hear and be encouraged just like you were. G6 is also supported by partners and allies like you who are willing to financially give and be a part of this ministry with us. So if you feel like you'd like to be a part of this with us, just go to g6allies.com/partner, and we'd love for you to become our ally in our mission to serve pastors and their families. If you have questions, comments, or just want to talk more with us about your particular ministry needs, just email us at hello@g6allies.com. We can't wait to see you next time for our next episode.